Chapter 18. His opportunity came when Macaddash stepped onto an icy patch of snow. Their sliding, shuffling feet had churned and compacted the snow in the small clearing, and, for a fraction of a second, the Scotti was distracted as his boots slid on the frozen patch that had been exposed. It was only a small moment, but Will realized it might be the only one he would get. In one fluid movement, he stepped forward and threw the sax knife underhand at the general. He had seen the man's speed already, and he had no real hope that the throw would penetrate his defense. Quite the opposite, in fact, as he still planned to capture the Scotti alive. As the gleaming blade shot towards him, Macaddash swept the dirk across his body in a desperate parry, blocking the heavy sax at the last second. But the throw had served its purpose, distracting Macaddash's attention and deflecting the dirk. In the same instant the Scotti sent the sax knife spinning away, Will was upon him, his right hand grabbing the general's left wrist like a vice. But Macaddash was fast as a snake. The moment Will gripped his left wrist, he twisted to his left and jerked violently away from the ranger, pulling Will forward and off balance. At the same time, knowing his own right hand was useless, he jammed his right forearm up under Will's chin, across his throat, choking Will and forcing his head back. With his right arm extended by the Scotti's twisting, jerking movement, and his head being forced further and further back, Will could feel his grip on the knife hand weakening. He realized at the same time that the Scotti's bare arms and upper torso were lightly covered in grease, no doubt as protection against the penetrating cold, and this made it even harder to maintain his grip. He could feel Macaddash twisting his left hand back and forth, feel it turning inside his own grip, and he knew it would be a matter of seconds before he jerked free of Will's hold. Quickly, he threw two hard, hooking punches into the Scotti's exposed right side, hitting the ribs and feeling one give slightly. Macaddash grunted in pain, and the pressure of his forearm across Will's throat lessened slightly. It was enough. Will reached up and grabbed Macaddash's right wrist, dragging the forearm down from under his chin and twisting Macaddash off balance as he did so. It was coincidental that he grabbed hold of the Scotti's right wrist at the point where his arrow had caused so much damage. As Will's iron grip fastened onto his injured arm, Macaddash screamed in agony and tried to double over in an instinctive movement to protect himself. The galvanic twisting action caught Will off guard, and he lost balance, releasing his grip on the right wrist, his feet slipping in the compacted snow beneath their feet. The two of them staggered around the clearing, Macaddash's knife hand still locked in Will's grip, and now Macaddash went on the attack again. He threw his right forearm at Will's face. The young ranger ducked the blow, then just managed to twist his body to one side in time as Macaddash's right knee jerked up at him. Now all of Will's focus was directed at maintaining his grip on the hand that held the razor-sharp dirk. He knew that if he lost that grip, he would be finished. All thought of taking Macaddash alive was now gone. Will was thinking only of survival. He grabbed the long pigtail that hung down the left side of Macaddash's head and jerked it up and over, dragging the Scotti's head to the right. The general howled in pain and turned his head, teeth snapping, trying to lock onto Will's hand. As he did so, Will swept his left leg across in a scything action that took the general's feet from under him, sending him crashing to the snow, Will on top of him, his weight driving the air from the general's lungs. Again, he felt McHaddish twisting and turning the knife hand in his grip, trying to break free. Then the general heaved convulsively and rolled to the right at the same time, reversing their positions so that now he was on top, the dirk hand poised above Will's throat, slowly starting to move downwards as he put his weight behind it. Ignoring the pain in his right arm, McHaddish placed his right forearm behind his knife hand and bore down with all his strength and weight. Will gripped the knife hand now with both his hands, trying to force the dirk away to the side. But he felt a hollow sense of despair as he realized that the Scotti was heavier and stronger than he was. In a contest of strength and force like this, McHaddish must win. Fighting on their feet, Will might have had a slight edge in speed and mobility, but here all the advantages were with the Scotti. Will heaved and bucked desperately, trying to throw the other man off. But McHaddish was expecting the movements and countered them easily. Each time, Will gained a little respite as the knife moved away from him. But inexorably, McHaddish would bring it back, forcing it down towards Will's throat. And Will was tiring. The sweat of fear and panic and exertion was running into Will's eyes as he watched the gleaming tip of the dirk moving closer and closer. Behind it, vaguely, he could see McHaddish's face, the features obscured by the paint that covered half of it. He could see the eyes and saw a light of triumph in them. And he saw McHaddish's lips draw back in a fierce smile as the Scotti realized that any second now it would all be over. And then, sooner than he had expected, it was. Bang! Bang! The heavy brass pommel of Horus's sword slammed into the Scotti's temple twice in rapid succession. Will felt McHaddish's strength suddenly fade to nothing, and all that was left was his dead weight bearing down on the knife as his eyes glazed and he slumped unconscious. With one final convulsive heave, Will threw him off to the side and staggered to his feet, reeling a little as he moved away from the inert body in the snow. Horus stepped towards his friend and put an arm around his shoulders to steady him. Thank God, Horus thought. He had made it just in time. He had lost track of Will and McHaddish as he provided the diversion that Will needed to overtake the Scotti. And, he realized grimly now, that had nearly resulted in Will's death. For the past 5 minutes, Horus had been blundering blindly through the trees and bushes, heading in what he hoped was the right direction. Ironically, it had been McHaddish himself who had provided the vital clue that led him here. When Will had grabbed hold of his injured right wrist, the general's high-pitched, agonized scream had given Horus the direction he needed, and he had raced through the trees towards it. He had no idea who had screamed, whether it had been Will or McHaddish, and he feared the worst, expecting to find his friend lying in a pool of blood in the snow. When he reached the clearing and saw the two struggling figures, he felt a huge sense of relief. Will was alive. The relief was short-lived, as he realized, with some alarm, that if he didn't take a hand in the next few seconds, he probably wouldn't stay that way for long. He drew his long cavalry sword, stepped quickly across the clearing, and slammed the heavy pommel into the side of McHaddish's head. Then, because the sight of that long dirk so close to Will's throat had filled him with rage and fear, he did it again in quick succession. Now he saw, with some concern, that the front of Will's jerkin was covered in blood. "Are you all right?" he said, taking his arm from Will's shoulders and turning him so he could see more clearly, looking for some sign of a wound. Will coughed and retched in reaction to this close shave. He knew how near to dying he had been, and his legs were weak from the thought of it. "Will," Horus said, concern making his voice harden. "Are you okay?" The young warrior was frantically running his hands over Will's chest and stomach, trying to see where he might be wounded. There was a lot of blood soaked into his jerkin front, and it had to be coming from somewhere. Still in slight shock, Will reacted angrily to the question. "Of course I'm not all right, you idiot," he snapped. "He damn near killed me, or didn't you notice?" He tried to slap Horus's searching hands away, but didn't succeed. "Where did he get you?" Horus asked frantically. He knew he had to find the source of that blood and staunch the flow. Wounds to the stomach and torso were all too often fatal, he knew, and he felt panic rising in him as he continued to search. "Leave it," Will shouted angrily, stepping back from him. "It's McHaddish's blood, not mine." Horus looked at him, uncomprehending for a moment. "Not yours?" he said. "No. Look at his hand where the arrow hit him. He was pouring blood all over me as we fought. I'm fine." And, illogically, right on the heels of a sudden rush of relief, Horus felt his anger welling up. "His blood? Why didn't you say so? I was frantic here, thinking you were bleeding like a stuck pig." "When did you give me a chance?" Will said. "You were all over me, grabbing at me, turning me this way and that." The anger, of course, was nothing more than reaction to the shock and fear they had both felt. But it was no less real for all that. "I'm sorry," Horus snapped back. "Forgive me for being concerned about you. It won't happen again." "Well, if you'd got here a little sooner, there wouldn't have been a problem," Will retorted quickly. "Where the hell were you, anyway?" "Where the hell was I? Where the hell were you? I nearly went crazy trying to find you. Is this the thanks I get for saving your life? Because, let me tell you, it didn't look as if you were having the best of it with our friend here." He nudged the unconscious McHaddish with the toe of his boot. The Scotti general made no sound. But Will had the grace to look suddenly chastened as he realized his friend was right. "I'm sorry, Horus. You're right. You saved my life, and I'm grateful." "Well." Now it was Horus's turn to shuffle his feet uneasily. He knew the reason for Will's apparent anger. He had seen it in many soldiers who had come close to death, and he knew Will hadn't meant to be ungracious. "That's okay. Think nothing of it." He looked for a way to change the subject and realized the perfect opportunity was lying unconscious in the snow. "I suppose we'd better get him back to Grimsdale," he said. He stooped and grabbed the Scotty's arm to heave him up and over his shoulder, then realized the man's right arm was still pulsing blood. "Better bind this up or he'll bleed all over me," he said. Quickly, he cut a strip off the man's tartan and wrapped the injured wrist in it. Then, with Will's help, he managed to get the dead weight of the general over his shoulder. He wrinkled his nose with distaste. "He's a bit ripe close to, isn't he?" he said. Will shrugged. "I was too busy to notice." He glanced around the clearing, saw his sax knife half buried in the snow, and retrieved it. falling into step with Horus as they headed back to the ambush site. "Thanks again, Horus," he said. Horus shrugged, as much as he could with McHaddish balanced across one shoulder. "Oh, forget it," he said. They trudged through the snow in silence for a few minutes. Then Will couldn't help himself. "But really, where the hell were you?" he asked.